Now, through this journey of life, this journey in the music business, and this is, look, man, I just hit record on here, and this is stream of consciousness, but it's inspired by a comment that I just read. Every now and then, I'll save a comment that comes in on the channel, and there's been many lessons that I give out on this channel. Many lessons learned in this music business. And look, I know this is a guitar channel, right? I know this is a guitar channel, right? But really, this channel is about life. This channel is about the lessons we learn in the music business. This is about the lessons we learn as guitar players, as musicians. This channel is about the lessons that you learn along the way in life. The music business teaches you, playing an instrument teaches you, dealing with people along the way teaches you, dealing with the places you have to live to survive, right? And, a lot of people on this channel like to hear about the Sunset Strip days, right? And that was a unique time period, like a period piece, right, of life. Living in LA in the, late 80s, early 90s, it was a wild time, right? There were many lessons that I learned. Often when you're young, you're learning lessons, right? But you don't realize that you're learning these lessons. You don't realize that these everyday experiences are actually lessons. And here's the deal, man. So, had to pause to grab Ace. So Ace is here. But here's the deal, man. You often don't realize that when you're in the thick of it, right? And especially as a young kid, you don't realize that you're learning lessons every day in life, and dealing with people and dealing with places. You don't realize that you're learning, right? You're learning lessons. And so often in the comment section, I'll get, messages or comments of people and the lessons they learned similar to mine. Look, many of us came up differently. Some of us might play different instruments. Some of you guys didn't go to the Sunset Strip. Some of you did. Some of you, play in the Mid-Atlantic, or you play in the Midwest, or you're playing in Memphis or Nashville or whatever, right? But experiences in life are similar, right? That's why a lot of people tune in. But I just went through, because a lot of times I'll save a comment, right? If, I think, man, this is a great comment. This is a great message. And look, man, even some of the guitar teachers in your life, right, can teach you lessons long after they're gone, right? And I'm gonna paraphrase this. I'm not gonna read this comment directly. I almost feel like it's too personal, right? But someone had commented on one of my Sunset Strip videos, and about the horror of Hollywood Boulevard, and just walking to school every day, going to GIT and seeing the people strung out and people screaming, and the Scientology building, and people getting lured into that, and then the addicts and the hustlers, and the violence, the crime, all of those things, the sirens, the helicopters, the drug dealers, all of these things, just trying to get to school, right? I just want to learn how to play guitar, right? And you're walking through, you've got your guitar on your back in a gig bag. You'd see all these long-haired dudes and long-haired, girls, all with guitars on their back, and there they are. They're walking to school. They're walking to GIT. but they're having to walk through the thick of Hollywood, man. Really, really, one of the roughest places in that area is Hollywood Boulevard. It's almost like it lures people to it with its allure of stardom and all of these things, the names on the sidewalk and everything. But it's one of the sketchiest places in Hollywood, man, because, it also lures runaways, which lures drug dealers, which the runaways turn into hustlers and addicts, and then there's the homeless and all of this, and it's just, man, it's a lot. It's a lot to deal with. It's a lot to see, back in those days. And so this comment was from someone that says, yeah, this was all true, all true. I was there. I saw it. And they describe seeing the lifeless faces of the people on the street and the desperation and all of these things, right? And that Tommy Tedesco, the world famous studio guitar player who, was often at the school, right? Was often there. And that Tommy's wife had worked at the school. And this person would be so freaked out after just walking down the street and seeing all the madness of Hollywood, right? That they would immediately have to run up the stairs and immediately go see Tommy Tedesco's wife because they were so freaked out by it all, right? And, she would often try and talk this person down, right? And, hey, it's okay. You're going to be all right. Just come in here. You're here to learn, all of that. But one day, Tommy Tedesco himself and his wife took this person to a 2-hour lunch, right? And sat them down and said, look, you will not survive in this cesspool. You've got to go home. And he said it was just as calm as they possibly could. It wasn't like, hey, get the hell out of here. It was like, look, this is a cesspool and you will never survive. You've got to get out of here. You've got to go home. And this person immediately bought a ticket and got the hell back home. But man, think about Tommy Tedesco, one of the most recorded guitar players of all time. First of all, taking his time out of his day to realize, hey man, he knows it's a cesspool. The teachers at that school, they knew Hollywood was shit, but they also knew that people were drawn to the West Coast. At that time, it was probably a place they could get cheap rent or buy a building cheap. And that's why they, put the school there. It's also close, if you're in America and you want to get Asian students from Japan, Los Angeles, it's the closest area in the States to Japan. And, and also, get people over from Europe and all of those things. And look, the school was filled with Japanese kids and filled with kids from Europe and filled with kids from the Midwest and, East Coast like me and, people from everywhere. And you know what? I remember seeing all those sights and seeing the desperation and seeing the street hustlers and seeing, kids younger than me out on the street, dirty, homeless, hungry, desperate, turning into street hustlers, having to turn tricks to make money. But I think, and here's the thing, that was so far removed from what I came from. It was so far removed, but I was so focused at the time. And I was somebody who had also spent a summer up in Boston, at Berkeley, and I talked about that on the channel, Surviving Berserkly, right? Surviving Berkeley, which was a wild place at the time, man. And Boston had its own, stuff going on, right? But, I was so focused on what I wanted to do. I knew from visiting New York, as a kid, that, man, cities are dangerous places, right? And you've got to walk like you know where you're going. You cannot look lost. You cannot look like you don't know what you're doing. You have to, be focused and, man, ignore people when they, hey, man, hey, and people trying to come up to you and all that. Sometimes you might have to sprint, and you gotta watch your ass, as they used to say on Fred Sanford. Didn't he have it? No, he said you gotta wash your ass. But I always used to say you gotta watch your ass, right? But man, if you're not tough, if you're not mentally strong, if you're not somebody that can handle seeing these things, and look, man, now that I realize it, a lot of us that went through that period and survived Los Angeles and all that, man, there's a certain trauma that we dealt with, and we were never the same after our time out there. You know what? I couldn't go from being living in Hollywood to, sitting at the dinner table, in small town Virginia and relating to the conversation at the table. That's not, and the same thing goes then with, years of playing music in Nashville and riding on a tour bus, which is kind of like being in the circus and touring across the country. Man, I can't relate to people talking about IRAs and, just mundane stuff. I'm like, and here's the deal. I'll stay quiet in those situations because I know these people can't relate to anything I'm talking about. It's only when you get around a bunch of people that are like-minded, that have been in the business, that have done all these things, that have shared experiences, where the stories and the real talk gets to come out. But man, nobody can understand, what you've been through. And I get a lot of people in the comments that were, around at that time, or moved out to LA, or played in hair bands, or went to GIT or MIT or PIT or BIT or whatever. And they know, man, they know. And, to see how some people can't survive in that type of situation. If you are a compassionate person that walks by, an empath that walks by and feels empathy, or is frightened by seeing scenes of destitution and seeing desperation on a daily basis, you're not going to be cut out for this business either, right? It's the same thing. Think about guys now playing Lower Broadway in Nashville. And look, man, you can say on one hand, it's an amazing scene with tons of musicians and tons of music and all that. But you're also seeing lots of crazy stuff going on down there. There's a lot of desperation down there. There's a lot of drug use going on. There's a lot of people overindulging in alcohol. There is people, puking and other things in the streets. And man, you know what? There's going to be a certain amount of trauma for people that do that for year after year after year. And if you think that they're going to feel normal after seeing that on a daily basis as their daily existence, how they paid the bills was playing for drunks down in Lower Broadway and seeing all the madness that goes on there. Man, I know musicians that won't play gigs down there after 6 o'clock because it gets too hairy, right? But imagine being a kid from a small town coming to Nashville because you know all the tunes and you get plugged in the scene, and then you change, man. You're like Axl Rose in the Welcome to the Jungle video, and he's got the straw in his mouth and the plaid shirt, and then he becomes that very thing which he mocks in the beginning. And a lot of us that moved out there from small towns would open up the music magazines and look at the bands and be like, what the hell is this? It was so far removed from the world that we grew up in. But the reality is, man, you gotta be mentally tough, right? To survive. You've gotta be mentally strong to survive it all. And Tommy Tedesco did an amazing thing in telling this person, this is a cesspool. You've got to go home. You'll never survive in this cesspool. Because he was absolutely right. And sometimes some of the greatest lessons you may learn, sometimes some of the greatest lessons a guitar player can teach you, or somebody like me can teach somebody on this channel. That's why you're not seeing me showing licks or pentatonics or any of that, man, because the greatest lessons that I can teach on this channel are about life, right? And Tommy Tedesco did an amazing thing when he told that person, you've got to get out of this cesspool. That is an amazing story and an incredible lesson that an absolute legend of guitar passed on to a student. It took a lot to survive back in those days, and it's a miracle that many of us are still around to tell the tale.